My name is Miranda Hale. I'm 31 years old, a college instructor who thought she finally had the perfect plan to make her parents happy. That morning, I learned just how wrong I was. It happened on the day of the trip, the Hawaii vacation I'd spent months organizing and paying for. The house smelled of fresh coffee and sunscreen. Everything looked ready. My parents stood by the doorway, their suitcases lined up neatly like trophies. My mom smiled, that polite, polished smile she uses when she's already decided something. My dad stood behind her, silent, avoiding my eyes. And next to them was my sister holding my ticket, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and acting like she'd earned it. "You're not going," my mom said softly, almost tender. "You've been busy. Rena needs this trip more than you." For a second I thought she was joking. But when my dad didn't say a word, I understood they meant it. I had worked extra hours, cut every expense, dreamed of seeing their faces light up under the Hawaiian sun. But standing there, I realized I was no longer part of the family I kept trying to hold together. I forced a small smile. "Enjoy?" I said, turning away. No yelling, no begging, just silence. The kind of silence that means something's about to break. Back in my apartment, I opened the travel app and hit cancel all. Watching the screen go blank felt like closing a door I should have shut years ago. Hours later, they came knocking, fists, hard voices, trembling with anger. I didn't open the door. I just sat there listening to the sound of consequences finally catching up. If your own family replaced you and then came begging at your door, what would you do? Stay silent or open it? Comment below and tell me what you'd do. A few weeks earlier, that same light had watched me plan something I believed was simple kindness. I wanted to give my parents something they had never experienced, a perfect escape from their routines. They had spent years talking about the ocean, about sunsets and waves they only saw on postcards. I decided it was time to turn those stories into reality. Every evening after finishing my lectures, I worked an extra shift at a local bookstore. I stopped buying coffee outside, cooked at home, and saved quietly. Hawaii was expensive, but I wanted everything to be flawless. A beachfront resort, premium flight tickets, and a private tour across the islands. When the confirmation emails arrived, I sat at my desk smiling, imagining my parents walking barefoot on warm sand for the first time. When I told my mother Diane about the plan, her voice trembled with excitement. She wanted every detail: the hotel name, the flight schedule, even the restaurant reservations. The next morning, she sent me a picture of the resort's pool that she had downloaded from the internet with a caption, "My daughter is the sweetest. I can't believe she's doing this for us." I didn't mind her bragging. It felt good to be the reason behind her happiness. I showed the itinerary to my father, and he said, "You didn't have to do this, kiddo." It wasn't exactly a thank you, but I took it as one. I told myself gratitude was not the point. Family time was. Then came Rena, my younger sister. She looked through the printed photos and shrugged. "Hawaii is too hot, and there's nothing interesting to film," she said while sipping her smoothie. I laughed lightly, assuming it was just her mood. Rena was always online, chasing trends, counting followers, and planning new collaborations. I still invited her, hoping that a week away from Wi-Fi would remind her what real connection felt like. I spent several nights checking the bookings again and calling the resort to confirm everything. I even added a surprise, a dinner cruise on the second night. The plan was simple. I would drive them to the airport, we would fly together, and maybe for once, nothing would fall apart. As the days passed, Diane became more animated. She started sharing pictures of the resort with her friends, posting captions like, "Can't wait for paradise," courtesy of my wonderful daughter. She mentioned the spa, the ocean view, the rooftop dining, each time describing it as if she was already there. I noticed the way she smiled when people commented. It wasn't joy, it was pride. I stayed quiet. Maybe I wanted her to have that feeling. Maybe I was still the little girl who needed her approval. A week before the trip, Diane invited Rena over to pack and discuss travel outfits. I joined them that evening. The living room was covered with open suitcases, dresses, and beach hats. Diane looked at me and said, "You know, Rena has never had a real vacation. This will be such a good experience for her. I nodded, thinking she meant all of us. Later that night, she texted me, "Can you email me the booking details? I want to print them in case we don't have Wi-Fi." I didn't think twice. I sent her everything from flight codes to hotel confirmations and even the check-in credentials. Looking back, that was my mistake. That same night, Rena posted a story that read, "Big news, coming soon, dream trip loading." I smiled when I saw it, assuming she was just excited. I didn't realize that the dream trip she mentioned was mine. In the final days before departure, I couldn't stop imagining the three of us walking together through Honolulu Airport. My parents had worked their entire lives. They deserved this. I believed Rena would finally learn that life was more than views and likes. I thought this trip would bring us closer again. Kindness can turn cruel when it is one-sided. I should have noticed the subtle change, the way my mother avoided answering who would handle the luggage, or the sudden group chat where she talked about finalizing details without me. I assumed it was a small mistake, just miscommunication. It wasn't. The gift I built with patience and love was already being turned into the excuse they would use to leave me behind. The morning of the trip, something felt off before a word was spoken. The air in my apartment seemed heavier than usual, as if it already knew what I didn't. I had packed everything the night before, checking the list twice, making sure every detail was perfect. The tickets, the itinerary, the travel insurance, all printed and ready. My suitcase stood by the door, shining with quiet optimism. I drove to my parents' house just after sunrise. The sky was still pale, the streets empty, and I kept telling myself this was the day everything would finally be worth it. I parked in front of the familiar white house with the blue shutters, took a deep breath, and walked toward the porch. The front door was slightly open. I could hear laughter inside. It sounded light, carefree, the kind of laughter that didn't need me in it. When I stepped in, the first thing I saw was Rena standing in the living room, already dressed in a flowing yellow maxi dress. Sunglasses perched on her head, her nails freshly done, a passport in her hand. She looked ready for a vacation ad. Her suitcase was next to the couch, the same model as mine, except newer, cleaner. For a second, I thought maybe she had come early to help me carry things. Then my eyes found Diane sitting by the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't warmth. It was something practiced, something she'd used before when trying to make bad news sound gentle. "Morning, sweetheart," she said. "Before you get too busy, we need to talk." I froze halfway to the table. About what? Rena adjusted her sunglasses and crossed her arms, clearly enjoying the tension. My father stood near the hallway, his posture tight, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. Diane sighed softly, as if she were about to deliver mercy. "Sweetheart, you're not going. Rena needs this trip more than you." For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her right. My heart thudded once, slow and heavy, before everything went still. "What do you mean I'm not going?" She spoke as though the decision had already been settled long before I arrived. "You've been under a lot of pressure, and this trip will be good for Rena's mental health. You understand, don't you? You're always so generous." I looked at my father, waiting for him to intervene, to remind her whose name was on every reservation, but he didn't move. His hand brushed over his wedding ring, eyes still on the tile floor. It was the silence that told me the truth he had known all along. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "The flights are under my name," I said quietly. Diane tilted her head, still smiling. "I had the travel agency update it. You were kind enough to share the confirmation details. Remember?" Rena gave a small laugh, pretending to check her phone. "Don't be dramatic, Miranda. It's just a vacation." Just a vacation. The words echoed inside me like an insult. Weeks of extra shifts, months of planning, all reduced to a favor I didn't even know I'd given. I felt the urge to shout, to throw the printed tickets across the room, to ask them how they could possibly justify this. But instead, I stood perfectly still. Years of disappointment had taught me that yelling never changed anything. I could feel my fingers tremble, so I gripped the handle of my suitcase to steady them. "Enjoy your vacation," I said finally. My voice came out calm, steady, the kind of calm that feels colder than anger. I placed my suitcase by the door, turned around, and walked out. The morning sun had climbed higher, glaring off the windshield as I got into my car. My reflection in the glass looked like someone I barely recognized, someone quieter, smaller, but strangely stronger. I started the engine and drove without looking back. By the time I reached the first traffic light, tears had already blurred the road. I wiped them away quickly, unwilling to let anyone see me breaking. That silence in my chest, the one that replaced the scream I didn't let out, told me something fundamental had shifted. They had chosen her. And in doing so, they had shown me exactly where I stood outside their world looking in. I drove until I reached the hill behind the community park where we used to have family picnics when I was a kid. I parked, stepped out, and watched the planes passing overhead. One of them was theirs. In that moment, something inside me hardened. Not anger, not hatred, just a quiet understanding that some relationships end long before people admit it. I realized I could either spend the rest of my life begging for a place in their story, or I could finally start writing my own. So I sat there for a long time, hands still trembling, watching the sky and learning what it meant to let go. They waved, and 30 minutes later, their smiles began to fade. From my apartment balcony, I could see the early traffic sliding through the city like moving light. The quiet hum of morning life filled the air, steady, unaware, peaceful. I poured myself a cup of coffee, placed my phone on the table, and opened the travel app. My name was still on every reservation, every hotel booking, every flight seat, every confirmation carried my initials. For a second, I stared at the screen, waiting for guilt to surface. It didn't. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately. I opened the airline account, scrolled through the details, and selected cancel trip. One by one, the flights disappeared from the schedule. The system asked, "Are you sure?" 3 times. I was. Then I logged into the hotel portal, withdrew the bookings, and redirected the refund to my personal email. It wasn't revenge. It was correction, setting things back to where they belonged. I set the phone aside and looked out the window. The world outside looked the same, but inside me, something had finally shifted. At 9:08 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from Diane: "Boarding soon. Wish you were here." I stared at it for a few seconds before locking the screen. There was nothing to reply to. I turned on some music, let the rhythm fill the room, and tried to breathe normally. I could almost picture them walking through the airport, confident, cheerful, certain that everything had gone their way. I imagined Rena taking selfies, Diane checking her reflection in the window, both of them wrapped in their small triumph. Then exactly 30 minutes later, another message appeared. "Our tickets aren't working. The counter says they were canceled. Did you do something?" My phone rang immediately after. I didn't answer. The second call came, then the third, then a video call request. I pressed decline. It rang again, and this time it was Rena, her face popping up in the preview, teary, furious, holding her phone in one hand and her boarding pass in the other. I let it connect for 2 seconds, long enough to see her expression. "Miranda, what the hell did you do? We can't board." "They said the booking doesn't exist anymore. Mom's freaking out." Her voice cracked, but it wasn't fear. It was entitlement shaking. I watched her face freeze when she realized I wasn't going to argue. I simply said, "You'll figure it out." Then I tapped end call. The silence that followed was deep, almost therapeutic. Another text came through, this time from my father. "Miranda, we're at the desk. They're saying everything was refunded. Please answer." His message was polite, hesitant, careful, as if we were strangers again. I didn't reply. I opened my laptop, checked my email, and saw the confirmations. Refund approved. Funds returned. Everything tidy. For once, control belonged to me. I leaned back on the couch, exhaling for what felt like the first real breath in months. The phone buzzed again, nonstop now. I flipped it face down on the coffee table and closed my eyes. A knock sounded at the door. Not them, of course, the mail carrier probably. Still, the sound made me smile. For years I had been the one running toward every knock, every message, every small call for help. That morning, I stayed where I was. A few minutes later, I called Jamie, my oldest friend. She picked up on the second ring, her voice groggy but warm. "Miranda, are you okay?" I hesitated for a moment, then said, "I didn't ruin their trip. I just stopped being their backup plan." Jamie was quiet, then softly said, "Good." That single word landed like a closing door, not harsh, just final. I sank deeper into the couch and turned the music up. A gentle acoustic song filled the apartment, blending with the faint hum of the city. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, spilling golden light across the floor. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the kind that depends on forgiveness or explanation, but the quiet sort that comes when you stop asking to be chosen. I let my eyes close, my breathing slow, and thought of the plane that would never leave the ground. Somewhere in an airport terminal, 3 people were realizing that taking something from me didn't mean they owned it. And somewhere, in that same moment, I was realizing that letting go didn't mean losing it, meant beginning. That night, the silence broke not with a phone call, but with a notification that glowed across my dark living room. It was from Instagram, and the name that appeared made my chest tighten before I even opened it. Diane. Her caption preview read, "Some people just can't stand to see others happy." My thumb hovered above the screen for a second before I tapped it. The photo loaded slowly, showing Rena sitting on a suitcase near the airport counter, her eyes red from crying, while Diane stood behind her with one hand on her shoulder, face tilted to the camera. The caption said, "Family should lift each other up, not tear one another down. Jealousy destroys love and trust." I stared at the screen, my heart sinking with each word. She had turned the entire story upside down. Within minutes, the post began collecting hearts and sympathy. Comments poured in from relatives, co-workers, even her old friends. "You don't deserve this," Diane, one wrote. Another added, "Some daughters never appreciate what they have." I could almost hear her satisfaction while she watched her version spread. I sat still on the couch, scrolling through the comments, not angry, but deeply tired. She couldn't face the embarrassment of what really happened at the airport, so she rewrote the story to make me look cruel and jealous. Rena probably stood beside her crying, and Diane decided to use that image to gain pity. She wanted the world to see her as a victim and me as the reason their dream vacation failed. I opened my email and scrolled to the folder marked Hawaii trip. Every document was there, saved carefully the day I booked it. Receipts, confirmation codes, hotel invoices, and my credit card transaction, all under my name. For the first time that day, I smiled slightly. She had told the world I destroyed something out of envy, but the truth was sitting neatly in my inbox, time-stamped and undeniable. I took screenshots of the booking emails and payment confirmation, then a picture of my credit card statement. Finally, I captured her Instagram post and placed them together in a new carousel. I typed my caption slowly, making sure it was calm, but impossible to misinterpret. "My mother says jealousy destroys families." Maybe she's right. I paid for this entire trip, every flight, every room, every meal. At the airport, I was told I wouldn't be going. The tickets were non-refundable. No one flew anywhere. Yet, I'm called jealous. I read it twice, then pressed share. The effect was immediate. Comments multiplied within seconds. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months sent messages of support. Coworkers shared my post with the caption, "Proof matters." My cousin from Seattle added "Family Manipulation 101." Within an hour, the screenshots spread across stories, group chats, and even local forums. Someone found an old email I had forwarded to a friend while planning the trip and tagged me under it. Now everyone knew the truth. When I checked again, Diane's post was gone. She had deleted it silently, but screenshots were already everywhere. People were asking questions she couldn't answer. Then Rena posted a short story that read, "I only did what Mom told me." It was meant to calm things down, yet it made everything worse. The sympathy shifted entirely toward me. That night, I didn't celebrate or argue. I simply turned off my phone and looked out the window. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace, not because I had won, but because the truth had finally spoken for itself. The next afternoon, it was heavier than I expected, steady and deliberate, echoing through the hallway before fading into silence. When I opened the door, both of them stood there. My father's expression was tense, his jaw clenched while Diane's face was red and streaked with makeup. For a second, none of us spoke. The air between us carried the kind of quiet that only follows public humiliation. Then Diane stepped forward. "You made us look ridiculous," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and shame. "Do you know what people are saying about us, about me?" I leaned against the doorframe, meeting her eyes without answering. My father's tone was colder. "Take the post down," he said. "Now." Their presence in my doorway felt like a performance they had rehearsed. Diane appealed to emotion, my father to authority, and both ignored the one thing that mattered, the truth. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone," she continued, her voice rising. "Your aunt called your cousins, texted my friends from church, saw those pictures. You ruined our reputation." I finally spoke. "No one gets embarrassed for being innocent. If you're humiliated, maybe it's because you did something worth being ashamed of." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. My father exhaled sharply, stepping closer. "Miranda, this isn't the way to handle family business. You could have called us. You could have fixed this quietly." His voice carried that firm tone I had grown up obeying, the one that ended arguments before they began. But I wasn't a child anymore, and I was done being quiet. "I tried fixing things quietly for years," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You just never listened." Diane's eyes filled with tears. She wiped them, careful not to smear what was left of her makeup. "Do you have any idea what it's like to have your own daughter turn the internet against you?" I felt something heavy press against my chest, but refused to let it soften me. "You did that to yourself," I said. "I didn't post lies. I posted facts. You could have admitted what happened, but instead, you told everyone I was jealous. You wanted sympathy. Now you have attention, just not the kind you expected." Her shoulders trembled. For the first time that evening, she looked small. My father, meanwhile, grew angrier. "We've done everything for you," he said. "You think you're better than us now? You humiliated your mother." I met his glare. "I didn't betray you." "You did." The words slipped out slowly, heavier than I intended, but they felt right. I watched the moment they hit him, the slight twitch in his jaw, the disappointment shifting into something darker. The room stayed silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Diane finally turned away from me, whispering to my father, "Let's go." He lingered a moment longer, his eyes cold but uncertain, then followed her out. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, my hands still shaking even though my voice had stayed calm. Outside the window, their car sat idle for a few minutes before pulling away. I watched the headlights fade down the street until the house was quiet again. My reflection in the glass looked strange to me, the same woman, but different somehow. There was no satisfaction in what happened, only a deep and quiet certainty that I had done what was necessary. The next morning, my inbox was filled with messages. Some were from relatives apologizing for believing the lies, others from friends saying they were proud of me for standing up for myself. A few were from strangers who had read about the story online, thanking me for reminding them that silence isn't always kindness. I read each one slowly, unsure how to respond. I made coffee, sat by the window, and let the steam rise into the morning light. Somewhere out there, Diane was probably trying to control the damage, deleting comments and pretending everything was fine. My father would stay quiet as he always did, choosing peace over truth. But for once, the silence belonged to me. That evening, I walked past the same door where they had stood and realized something had changed. The fear that used to make me small around them was gone. I had spoken the truth, and it had cost me the illusion of family harmony, but what I gained was far greater. I had reclaimed my voice. The next morning, peace finally replaced the noise. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, falling across the half-packed boxes near the window. My phone buzzed on the table, its screen lighting up with a message from Rena. It started with 2 words I never thought I would read from her. "I'm sorry." The rest came in fragments, uneven and desperate. She wrote that people in town had stopped speaking to them, that her friends refused to film with her, that even Diane couldn't step into the market without whispers following her. I read the message twice, feeling neither anger nor satisfaction. Then I set the phone down and let it buzz again with her follow-ups unanswered. There was a soft knock a few minutes later. When I opened the door, June stood there holding 2 cups of coffee. Her smile was calm, the kind that carried quiet understanding. "You probably haven't eaten," she said, handing me 1 cup. I thanked her and invited her in. We sat by the window in silence for a while before she finally spoke. "Some lessons arrive with silence," she said. "The loud ones rarely last." I looked at her, surprised by how her words felt heavier than any sympathy could. She stirred her coffee and continued. "I once stopped speaking to my son. He made choices I couldn't accept, and I punished him with distance. Years later, I realized I was just punishing myself. I didn't know what to say, so I listened. June wasn't there to fix anything, only to remind me that pain could have purpose. You did what you needed to do," she said before leaving. "Now you let it breathe." When the door closed, the house felt lighter. For the first time in days, the silence didn't sting. By noon, another notification appeared on my phone. It was from Jamie. "Your mom commented under your post," she wrote. "It's an apology, a real one." I hesitated before opening the app. Under the original post, where thousands of comments had gathered, Diane had written, "I was wrong. My daughter deserves better than how I treated her. I let pride destroy something that should have been love. I hope someday she'll forgive me." The words didn't look like hers yet. They were there, plain and public. For a moment, I wondered if guilt had finally outweighed pride, or if the pressure from others had simply forced her hand. Either way, the apology wasn't for me. It was for the audience she once fooled. Jamie texted again, "You okay?" I typed, "I will be," but didn't send it. Instead, I clicked the 3 dots beside my post, selected Turn Off Comments, and locked the screen. The story had ended not with a grand reconciliation, but with quiet clarity. I spent the afternoon packing the rest of my things. Each item I folded into the box felt like a piece of history I was finally ready to archive, not erase, but store away. Photos, old letters, little gifts from years when love still felt unconditional. The act wasn't bitter. It was deliberate, almost cleansing. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of a distant lawnmower, the hum of normal life resuming beyond my walls. I realized peace didn't arrive with forgiveness or apology. It came with the decision to stop waiting for either. As evening drew in, I looked around the apartment one last time. The silence that once echoed with hurt now felt sacred, like the first breath after a storm. I picked up my suitcase, turned off the lights, and whispered to no one in particular, "It's finally over." A week later, I unpacked boxes in my new apartment. The air smelled faintly of paint and new beginnings. The place wasn't large, just a 1-bedroom near the university, but it was mine, quiet, sunlit, and untouched by anyone else's expectations. Each time I opened a box, it felt like unfolding a chapter I had already finished reading. My books filled the shelves again, my photos went back on the wall, but something about them looked lighter, like they finally belonged to someone free. That morning, I saw June again downstairs. She was watering the small garden near the mailbox, wearing her familiar straw hat. When she noticed me, she waved with a smile that felt like a promise of peace. "Settling in?" she asked. I nodded, holding my coffee. "Feels lighter," I said. She chuckled softly. "It usually does when you stop carrying what isn't yours." Her words landed quietly, not as advice, but as truth. Life around me began to move again. I started teaching part-time at the community college nearby, helping freshmen with creative writing. Talking to students reminded me that stories didn't need perfect endings to be meaningful. Sometimes the lesson was simply in surviving the middle. News about my parents reached me through the same quiet channels that once carried gossip. The church stopped inviting them to host events. Neighbors no longer waved when they passed their house. The same people who once admired them for their family image now avoided eye contact. Reputation, I realized, fades faster than guilt. Rena's life had changed too. Her brand partners canceled collaborations after the scandal went public. Her social media numbers dropped sharply. I heard from Jamie that she had taken a job editing wedding videos to pay her rent. The irony wasn't lost on me. The sister who once mocked my practicality now survived on the kind of quiet effort she had called boring. One afternoon, while sorting through files on my laptop, I opened Instagram out of habit. Among the unread messages was one from an unfamiliar account. The profile picture was blank, but the preview showed 2 words: "We're sorry." My stomach tightened for a second before I recognized the writing style. It was them. I didn't open it. I stared at the message long enough to know what I wouldn't gain from reading it: not closure, not comfort, not even anger. Then I deleted it. The next few days passed quietly. The peace felt unfamiliar at first, like walking in new shoes, but it didn't hurt anymore. I filled the apartment with small things that felt like mine: a lavender candle, an old record player, a cheap rug that made the floor warmer. On Sunday, June left a small potted plant at my door with a note: "For new roots." I smiled, placing it on the windowsill. That evening, I set up my camera for the first time since everything happened. The tripod clicked into place, the lens caught the golden hue of sunset, and I looked straight into it. My reflection didn't carry sadness or victory, just calm truth. "Not every story ends in forgiveness," I said. My voice was steady, almost quiet, but every word was deliberate. "Sometimes peace means distance." I let a small smile touch my lips. Thank you for listening. If this story made you think, share your thoughts below. Maybe someone else needs to hear them too.